Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cohesion Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Steve Hunt. He's a recognized expert on strategic HR and has written over 100 articles, published 3 books, and supported HR efforts with companies across 5 continents, and generally just really understands human psychology and future of work, like how this works for employees. I'm super excited to chat with him. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Awesome. So we start this off with some rapid fire questions to get to know. I mean, we're not going to really get to know you, but we'll get to know you a little bit personality wise. And the first one is, if you could know the answer to one unsolved mystery, which mystery would you want to know the truth about?
I am so glad that you sent these questions ahead of time, because the rapid fire, because it's not like a rapid fire answer. I had to think about them for a long time. At first one, of course, immediately I thought, well, life after death. And then I thought to myself and got sort of philosophical that I don't think I'd actually want to know if there's life after death, right? Because it would mess you up in life if we actually knew, right? And so the one I came up with is life on other planets. It would be interesting to know if there actually is life on other planets.
Yeah. It would mess me up. Like, what if life after death, you're just like waking up, everything's fine? Then I probably couldn't wait. That would be weird, maybe.
Or what if it was something boring or terrible? Then you just live your life terrified. Or what if it was really, really good? And then you'd be like, well, maybe I should just move on.
This is it. Yeah, it's time. So it's time to go. Let me pack my bags.
It's good we don't know. I don't want to know.
What is the most impactful piece of media you've consumed this year?
Again, on this one, I consume so much media, and not all of it healthy, much like food.
Yeah.
And I think recently something I saw, and I kind of knew, but when I just saw recently just how far it's advanced, how quickly, is the ability of generative AI to mimic humans visually, not the text and everything, but like literally to make movies of other people doing things people never did, right? And it's so much in our society is, seeing is believing. And it's probably my biggest concern about AI is that falsification of reality that it enables, which on one hand is really cool, makes great movies. On the other hand, it could really screw us up.
Well, imagine the right now we'll believe fake news. It's just text and crazy that comes out, misinformation, disinformation, and then when you can see it, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. So I'm really wondering how that's playing out eventually. It does go to something more larger, just psychologically. Somebody's asking me, what could we do to make the world a better place? And I'm like, well, if people would just stop looking at their phones and look at the world around them, they'd probably feel a lot better. Because actually, we got issues in the world, but by statistically, we're actually doing pretty well. Compared to life 100 years ago. But when all you do is get it from some version of reality on your phone, it screws up our heads. Going back to that life on death thing. Life
after death thing. No, that's true. Well, if I could put myself on stage singing Bob Dylan songs, be in key, just look like I'm at a concert, I might try that, post that to social. I'm just kidding.
But if you're actually truly imitating Bob Dylan, you wouldn't actually be on key.
That's I just watched the We Are the World documentary, and he took a while to do his part for that song. But I love the guy. It was interesting to see. Yeah. What is your golden rule for work?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would just go with the classic golden rule, which is treat others as you'd want to be treated. Yeah. But I think even more so, and even though I think we have to modify that, because I think part of being emotionally intelligent in the sense is realizing other people don't necessarily want to be treated the way you like to be treated. Some people, I've definitely realized that in my own work, that I'm very comfortable with feedback because I grew up in a very feedback-rich environment. Other people don't necessarily share that the gift of feedback. But I would say more specific when I was like this one is be responsive, kind, and transparently realistic. And by that I mean, if somebody asks you for something, even if what really bothers me is people that just ignore people. If somebody, I get asked requests all the time, through LinkedIn, and I've got over 10,000 contacts on LinkedIn because I meet with so many people. And if somebody asks me for something, it's a human asking for something. And I usually to get back, if nothing else, to say, hey, I'm not interested, or, And if I can help them, try to help them, because that could have been you in some place. I mean, at the same time, it does really bother me that we've got these chatbots pretending to be humans, and those I ignore.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I try, and also if I can't help people, be realistic about it. If somebody says, because provide information that either helps people directly, or even if you can't help them, helps them manage their own world. Right? It's like
Hmm.
if they ask you for something that's never going to happen, tell them it's never going to happen, so they can move on.
Yeah. 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 Transparently realistic. No, I like that. I mean, transparent might mean I'm not interested,
Yeah.
and that's okay to say. Just be honest. And then, what are you most proud of? What are you most proud of?
I was thinking this. You got to say your family. If you don't say your family, you shouldn't have a family. I'm like, so. I've got incredible family. Both, my children directly, my wife, my extended family, my nieces. I'm just fortunate to live in a family that
Yeah.
I get to live vicariously through all these people doing really cool stuff. So,
Yeah.
I look forward to getting together with them. So I don't know if proud. I like to think I had something to do with it. I certainly contributed in some small way.
Yeah.
But I guess at a personal level through the work is the hopeful feeling that I've positively influenced the lives of millions of people through my work, because my work involves helping companies use technology to create more effective work environments. And as a psychologist, kind of really like saying, how can we use technology to make people feel more recognized, respected, support their growth and their development? And,
Hmm.
the three big things that impact happiness in our lives are our relationships, our experiences, and our health.
Hmm.
And work is a huge part of all three of those things. And so I think when I look at this, that the work I've done, if you just looked at the number of employees that have used the technology that I've helped design, influence, get deployed, it's
Yeah.
millions and millions of people around the world. So I like to think in a small way, I've positively influenced people's lives that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, your most recent book, Talent Tectonics, you write about the global workforce, or people, that there's a shift happening, and we're sort of reimagining the employee experience, like to be helpful for them. How is the nature of work changing?
Yeah, that's why I wrote this book, Talent Tectonics, because my job really, I'm a psychologist that works for a global technology company, interacting with thousands of organizations around the world. And I'm talking to them about how can we create more effective work environments. And over the last several years, and it was really accelerated during the pandemic, I found that the same questions were coming up again and again and again across very different industries. And so kind of looking at those trends, and what I realized is, what is one of the biggest things is the very nature of work itself is changing. The very purpose of work is changing. From, it used to be that we hired people primarily to be productive, but now we mainly hire them to be, in a way, adaptable and responsive and creative and collaborative.
Yeah.
And I'll put it in historical context, as I always look at work sort of in historical context. So if you want to know where we're going in the future, you got to look at where we came from in the past.
Makes sense.
And if you went back 200 years ago to the, most people know that there's the agricultural age, and there's the industrial age, and now we're in the knowledge and service age. And you could argue if we're kind of entering a different version of knowledge and service. I still think we're just in the knowledge and service age.
Yeah.
It's just getting more and more dominant. And you're like, that's an economic view of the industries and segments of the economy where people work. But if you look at work from a psychology point of view, which you look at, why do people work? What is the purpose of work in our society? 200 years ago, the purpose of most people's work was to grow and distribute food so we didn't starve to death. The purpose of work was to keep us alive. Talk
Yeah.
about meaningful work.
That's right.
Literally, that's why
No,
people
yeah.
worked. It was to
Yeah.
grow and distribute food so that we didn't die. Then, with the Industrial Revolution, we got far faster at growing and distributing food. So a lot of people's work shifted from keeping us alive to making things to make us comfortable, clothes,
Hmm.
cars, things like that. Now, with digitalization and automation and technology sort of changing the nature of work, most work now is what we call knowledge and service work. Well, what's the purpose of knowledge and service work? Is you're solving problems or providing services to make other people feel good about whatever it is that you're providing for them, whether that is the product itself or the services around it. Really, the purpose of work is to exceed other people's expectations for what they expect from you or the company you work for. And because that's what we want from a company. We want you to meet or exceed our expectations for
Yeah.
whatever it is you're providing to us. But because of technology also, people's expectations are shifting really, really rapidly. How
Hmm.
quickly we expect our packages to show up, what we expect our computers to do, how we want our cars to run. All of these things are shifting. The service experiences we expect when we go to restaurants, all these things are constantly shifting. So what we're employing people to do is to keep track of how these expectations are changing, both in terms of what people want and how we deliver it. And the
Hmm.
purpose of work is really to requires people to be much more adaptable to these constant changes. And this really shifts the importance of employee experience because people can do repetitive, mindless work like
Hmm.
shoveling dirt all day long and feel like crap. A matter of fact, if they do it, they probably will feel like crap, but they can also feel like crap and do it. They kind of go together, right? You cannot provide excellent customer service. You cannot be creative, collaborative, all the things companies want people to do if you feel exploited, burned out, or exhausted. Yet the pace of change people are facing is making them feel exhausted and burned out. And this is
Hmm.
why I wrote this book, Talent Tectonics, is it talks about how do we need to manage work differently, where we need to provide people an experience where they view change as, yeah, this growth opportunity, as opposed to just burned out and exhausted. There's a phrase in psychology called emotional labor, which refers to the physical and mental toll that happens when people try to or act differently externally from how they actually feel internally. We all know it. It's like it's hard to smile when you feel crappy.
Yeah. 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 You bring up this, and I don't know how much of a difference there is between these two things, but when you talk about industrial revolution and some of the things we saw that like making a yard of cloth,
Mm-hmm.
it was like a week to make a yard of
Yeah.
cloth before industrial revolution to like weave that, put it together, everything. I mean, you had women staying at home, and most of the job was like feeding a family and repairing their clothes over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again, or making the clothes and putting them together. And then that happened. We had sort of exploitive labor, lots of things that came with that, and its own sort of, I guess, challenge with, I don't know, burnout's the right thing to say, but it's like, yeah, it's like shoveling dirt. I could certainly get to that point. So you're miserable doing it. Now, is there a difference that we're experiencing between sort of that exhaustion that would happen, during the Industrial Revolution, and then you talk about this emotional burnout or this knowledge working burnout? How are those two things different? Is one worse than the other? Is one new? I
Yeah.
mean, one's new. Yeah.
One is physically worse and one is psychologically worse. One of the things I talk about is, anyone who tells you work was better 50 years ago did not work 50 years ago. Work physically wore people down. I mean, it shortened people's lifespans. Work now is physically much easier than it used to be, but it's psychologically much more difficult because you've got to be engaged. I mean, I'll use that example of like shoveling dirt. I
Sure.
used to say when I would do presentations on this, I'd say you can shovel coal and feel miserable, but you can't provide excellent customer service and feel miserable. And I said that once, and an audience member raised their hand. I'm like, yes. And she goes, I work for a mining company. That's hitting kind of close to home. But then she said, you're wrong. The way that we mine now uses highly sophisticated machinery. The last thing in the world that we want is to somebody come in who's just mentally not fully present, because it can lead to accidents. It can lead to breaking machinery. We need people to be fully engaged, even when
Yeah.
they're digging coal, which historically we didn't think of a fully present kind of job, right?
Mhm.
And so this shift is looking at how do we need to manage work differently in this psychologically more difficult world. Now, increasingly, we used to hire people largely to act like machines, show up, do exactly what you're told, and do it over and over and over again. Now we're
Mhm.
using machines to act like machines. And what we're learning with things like generative AI is any technology, what it does is it automates repetitive tasks. Even like a self driving car is automating a repetitive task. And so we're just being able to automate more and more and more things. And says, well, what does that leave for people to do? It leaves for people to do the one thing technology can never do, which is be human. Matter of fact, it's creepy when it tries, right?
Yeah.
And it even crosses over into something that goes beyond just the behavior. There was I saw this article by a clinical psychologist who talked about the use of generative AI for clinical psychology. And I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
familiar with the field. And she said, tactically, it can do a lot of the same things. It can say the same things and repeat. But she said a big part of clinical psychology, just as a good part of customer service, is knowing there's another human who actually cares about you. And caring is defined as a human giving their life in the form of time and attention for another human. Technology
yeah,
can never do that, right? But we also know that, humans can be really good at caring. They can be really crappy at it too. And that has a lot to do with how they're managing the experiences they have. And so I think when you look at this, how is the nature of work changing? In the Industrial Revolution, the big shift in working was literally about people's lives. The really big, and when I talk about this concept of talent tectonics, it's a reference to like the tectonic plates. We have these plates,
yeah,
that we can't see, that are moving all the time, but we experience the results of their movement in mountain ranges or earthquakes.
yeah,
The
yeah.
same thing you can look when we apply to work, is there's these underlying sort of talent tectonic shifts. And the one we're talking about right now that we're going through is this massive thing of digitalization, changing the nature of work by technology permeating every aspect of work in society, which requires us to rethink work and employee experience. Well, to your point, though, how is that different from like when they were making yards of cloth?
Hmm.
The big talent tectonic shift of the 20th century, well, there were two, but one of them was the workers' rights movement. In the 1900, there was no occupational health and safety. Companies would actually factor in how many people are going to die on the job when they're doing their recruiting plans. I'm not making that up.
No, no.
And so there was a huge move about employers' obligations to protect the health, well-being, and physical safety of employees. And this was not a gentle transformation. Entire governments fell, union organizations, all sorts of things like that. But a lot of the things that we take for granted about work around physical safety did not always exist. Now
Hmm.
that we're running into the thing, but it's psychological safety. We're going through now, and the next phase of work is what can companies do to create a sense of psychological safety, not just so that they can attract and retain employees, because the other big shift is that there's fewer employees relative to the
Right.
labor market because we're having fewer kids. So it's part of attracting engagement. We have to provide a psychologically safe, supportive environment because people can't do what we want them to do if they feel exhausted and burned out. And I think that's the really big shift in talking about the nature of work. Now, the one constant, I'm talking about things that are changing. The one constant, though, we have that we have to focus on is the one thing that isn't changing is the fundamental psychology of people.
Yeah.
So you're like, well, is it that people want different things now than they used to want? No, your grandparents wanted psychological safety, but it wasn't as important as physical safety. They were just, thank God I could get a place that I'm not going to get killed.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
idea of having a place that I'd enjoy my work, that would just that just didn't exist 100 years ago, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
Maslow's hierarchy, right?
yeah, we've moved
Yeah.
up, and now the hierarchy now is, employees just like, they want a job where they feel engaged, and it's so easy to change jobs now. Whenever I hear like people say these kids these days, they don't want to work, and I'm just like, no, they don't want to work for you, and why should they? Your job sucks.
Well, if you're the one saying these kids these days don't want to work, then absolutely no, I don't want to work for you.
They don't want to work, and they don't have to, and they're 2 clicks on Google from another job, right? It's like, so.
I wonder this idea of burnout. We hear people talk about this a lot. I talk about it a lot. I mean, I work in tech, work with a lot of people. Is I guess one, like we mentioned, we have so many things that are helping us do our jobs, and that's only going to, I think, increase the repetitive tasks, things like that. So is burnout? Is it a real thing? Is it an exaggeration? Is it people just trying to come up with an excuse to, go trail running in the afternoon?
Burnout is a real thing, and it's better than apathy. Burnout is when you care about your work, but you cannot sustain the way that you're doing the work. Whereas apathy is you just don't care about the work at all.
Yeah,
That's
you're done.
right?
Yeah.
And it does get into that idea of the fundamental psychology of people doesn't change. One of the things when I talk a lot about this in talent tectonics is one of the myths about people is that people fear change. That's not true. People fear poorly managed change. They fear change that's going to hurt them. And we're wired to be skeptical about change, right?
Yeah.
We're going back to we're scared little mammals in the trees. Change. but actually the competitive niche of humans as a species is our ability to adapt to changing environments. We're really good at it. Other animals aren't. It's why sadly there's lots more of us and fewer other animals, right? And it's called learning. And it's innate. When people have asked me, how do you teach people to be adaptable? And I'm like, that's the wrong question. It's like we're born adaptable. When kids are born, they only know how to do three things innately. They know how to eat, poop, and learn. And I always say, if you ever had kids, they're really good at all three.
They're great at it.
Yeah. But as a parent, you don't teach your kids how to learn. That's one of the joys of being a parent, is just seeing this amazing ability to learn that comes up in kids. And what your job as a parent is to create that environment, that supportive environment where it just taps into their natural learning ability. But it's not like you're like, oh, Billy's 6 months old, time to enroll him in crawling class. No, they just figure it out, right? Because you create this environment. Well, the problem is that historically we have focused on people focusing on learning till they're about age 25. And then it's like, okay, you've learned, now be productive. And we're most productive when we're doing stuff we already know how to do. So the work experience that maximizes productivity is very different from the work experience that maximizes adaptability. And I guess what you're getting into is the burnout. And it's a long answer to answer your question about burnout. But burnout is a result of when different psychological needs aren't lined up. There's three things that make us good at dealing with change. We're really good at dealing with change when, first of all, we understand why we're doing it. How is this affecting me? How is this helping me achieve what I want to achieve out of work or life? And that can be higher order career development. It can be save the planet. It can also be, I just want to pay for my kids' college or spend kids' time, have dinner at home with my family. I want to, but it's what's the purpose of the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
The second thing is humans are social animals. Particularly under stress, it's really important that we feel a sense of belonging, that we're part of a group. And it was an interesting thing in the during the pandemic, actually, studies on employee experience. It used to be the biggest driver of engagement was I'm recognized for doing rewarding and meaningful work. That's purpose. During the pandemic, it switched to I feel like I'm part of a group that cares for me. I feel a sense of belonging. So that's the second thing. So if we feel like meaningful work, part of a group that cares about us. And then the third thing is we have to be confident that we can actually achieve what it is we're being asked to do. A sense of sort of self-efficacy. I call this task experience, that I can do the tasks that you're asking me to do in the time I have to do them. When we have those three things, we know what we're doing. We're working with a team that can support us, and we never have everything we want, but we've got the tools and knowledge to make it happen. Change can be really exciting, really, really exhilarating. But if these things fall out of whack, we switch from exhilarating to more sort of like survival mode. And the biggest source of burnout in particular is when the purpose is there. I know why I'm here. I know this work. I want to be successful, but either the people I'm working with and leadership doesn't care about me, or I don't have the tools and resources to do it in an effective, efficient fashion. When those two things are gone, that's when burnout starts to come in.
Yeah. How big a deal is burnout? I mean, do we know? Are there studies on burnout? Do we know what it looks like broadly? Is it only in particular sectors?
It is. Yeah, it's gone up in general. Actually, it's gone up in general as sort of mental fatigue and mental exhaustion. And it's not just work, it's our society. We live in a psychologically noisy world. And not only is it that the world's changing quickly because of technology, we also have technology that any change, like if I was talking to somebody who worked in the news, and the way the news works is we look for what's the closest disaster, and we just go farther and farther out until we can find a disaster, and then we beam that to you. And so we spend a lot of time focusing on disasters on other parts of the world that create the same emotional reaction as if they were like, closer to us. And we just live in a world that, a lot of people have said this, but social media and all that is peddling emotion. It's not trying to teach you anything. It's trying to make you feel something so that you click on more things, right? And so we live in a very much an emotional, exhausting world. We're seeing like the American Psychological Association every year comes out with like a top 10 things psychologists should be thinking about. It was interesting your point about, are we seeing this one of the big psychological challenges right now is, well, there's mental health in general, but they said work instability. That people in the
Oh,
United
yeah.
States in particular are very concerned, about the stability of their jobs. And that's creating this sense of burnout, this sense of exhaustion. And I think it creates an interesting challenge for companies, which is given how much things are changing that the company can't control. As I put it, companies can't control how much change employees are going to experience, but they can influence how employees experience change by really trying to manage them in a way that makes sure they give them the sense of purpose, belonging, and confidence.
Yeah.
I will say too, one last little thing that's interesting on this point of, like you said, is it happening everywhere?
Yeah.
This is from, I work with a lot of talent management experts in very big companies. And from several companies that I've worked with that have very large professional workforces, but they also have very large, what's called sort of frontline deskless hourly
Yep.
workers, whatever, production workers. They said it's interesting. There's actually a switch that some of the highest engagement levels are actually the people with the most well-structured jobs. They're like, I know what I'm supposed to do. I come in, I do it, I leave, I'm done. The people that are burning out are the people that, you would think, oh, have a lot of autonomy and they get to work whenever they want. And they're just exhausted
Yeah.
because they're never done. There's always more to do. There's no, so it's funny. There's kind of been a switch that, like, people that clock in and clock off often are like, yeah, got that structure. I can control my work. The people that don't clock in and clock off often are people who are feeling the most burnout because of the ambiguity in their roles.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you need, creativity, what is it? Creativity goes up based on constraints or something to push against, like knowing clearly what it is that you need to accomplish or do.
Yeah. Mother is the necessity. How is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Yeah.
All I could think of was Frank Zappa and the mothers of invention.
It's funny. My first Frank Zappa album I got last year from my eldest son, which is great. You brought up, and I think this is really interesting. Speaking of Frank Zappa, sort of external forces on creativity, the news, the cycle, the psychological stuff that's outside of work. I saw, this is years ago, I saw Anderson Cooper it was like a Baptist church in downtown Phoenix. I went down there and he was speaking and everything. And somebody asked him at the end, he says, yeah, are there any questions? Somebody raised their hand. They said, yeah, how do you not like kill yourself or quit your job? Because it's just miserable. Like, because of all the news, the cycle, everything that's going on. He goes, you know what? People ask me that question a lot. And I can tell you, now this is a few years ago, it's probably changed a little bit. But he said, I can tell you that every major indices, like related to humans, human happiness. So it could be infant mortality, it could be violent crime, it could be like these things that we sort of associate with bad things. He goes, they get better. Like year over year, they've been getting better. And I think that's something that I certainly lose sight of and get caught up in those external forces that then affect me at work. And so are you saying on those external forces, even if it's our own stories that we're telling ourselves or seeing or watching the news or social media, that contributes to burnout along with kind of what goes on at work?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a book called Factfulness that talks exactly what Anderson Cooper is talking about. It was, if you look at all the metrics in general, there's been some changes from one year to the next, like with COVID.
Yeah.
But, we're living longer. Infant mortality rates have gone way down. People don't realize how many women used to die in childbirth. I mean, there are so many things that our society is getting better overall. I mean, there's a lot more we could do for sure, but, it is trending positive. So physically, it's going back to that point. Physically, the world is a better place than it used to be, but psychologically, it's an incredibly noisy place. And you're seeing these increases in things like mental health and depression. And, I think it's tied to a lot of things. I think certainly the social media. The way I put it is, in the 1950s, there was an explosion in sort of processed food and science of food. And what we learned, took a while, is that our bodies are organic and are not wired to live off of highly processed food, right? Sort of synthesized food. Well, I think what we're learning now is that our brains aren't designed to live off of highly processed, synthesized social communication. You
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of things in it. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just like process. We need, we couldn't feed the planet without modern food manufacturing techniques. But you can have too much processed food. You can have too much processed social communication,
Yeah.
and there's unhealthy. It's kind of like your question about impactful pieces of media. There's useful media on your phone, and there's junk food media on your phone.
Oh, that's interesting from the perspective of I think for a period of time is calories are calories.
Yeah.
But now we're at the point that not only is if it's processed or it's junk food, it's worse. And I wonder if that's the same when we know that community, belonging, like these types of things, like help you live longer, you have a happier life, things like that. If it's false community or plastic or like saccharin to sugar type of thing, is that even worse?
Yeah, it's kind of, I say that I think there's an appropriate way to use corn syrup. There's an appropriate way to use social media. These things are good overall if you use them the right way, right? And it's like, so yeah, I think that's one of the challenges that with companies, though. The challenge I think companies are facing when it comes to this issue of burnout, and going back to the point too, if you want your employees to be caring, collaborative, creative, they need to feel supported, they need to feel energized, they need to feel fully present. And we can't feel those things if we feel exhausted, burned out, stressed out, and anxious.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that create stress and anxiety in employees are not necessarily things at work. It's economic pictures. I mean, there's every week layoffs. You hear about, all these layoffs here, or you hear about, like generative AI, when I hear some people say, oh, well, we're going to work alongside the technology. You're like, okay, yeah, we are. But a lot of people are going to lose their jobs.
That's right. Yeah.
And telling them that they're going to work alongside the technology is not really going to help them in this period of like, I'm unemployed right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think with companies, the challenge is, as a company, you have to change, right? You've got to change. But how can we kind of deal with change and engage our communities that tries to create more of this psychologically safe environment? And part of psychological safety is feeling physically and financially safe as well, right? So I think if companies, and I'm seeing this, I see examples, I'm going to be like positive on this. So like seeing more and more companies that are investing in providing employees a lot more freedom to structure their lives. So for example, hybrid work is a really good example. Mm-hmm. And I see really big differences. The companies that are handling hybrid work well are realizing human interaction, going back to our social media thing, there is value meeting in person. If you meet a person, there's research before the pandemic that if you meet somebody once in person, it forever changes how you interpret your electronic communication with them. The way I talk about it, it's like your family. I think there's people in your family that you probably don't see very often, maybe once a year, maybe once every 3 years. But it's important that you see them in person periodically because it just reinvigorates the relationship. It strengthens the relationship. That's true at work too. Yeah, absolute value in getting together. But getting together doesn't mean forcing people into an office 3 days a week just to force them into an office 3 days a week. That's not work. That's incarceration, right? It's like... And so the companies that are doing this really well are taking what I call a mindful approach to the use of office space. They're like, yeah, we need to get people together. They also realize that these water cooler conversations people talk about almost never happen. Research
right.
showed these things. So the companies are doing it really well are saying, well, what is it that employees want? They want a sense of connection and strong, authentic relationships, which means we need to get together periodically. So they're creating spaces and environments and events to bring people together. And when they bring them together, they bring them to be together, not just to sit together in cubicles, but, so you can ignore somebody face to face as well as you can ignore somebody over the phone.
Yeah.
But they bring them together to events and things like that.
It's like purpose, like
right.
Purposefully, like bringing them together. Yeah.
Of space.
Yeah.
They are also they're recognizing that not all employees want to work from home. It has a lot to do with the home environment, whether you have a home office, the length of your commute, the nature of work you do, your personality. But what all employees want is they want two things. They want flexibility to decide what makes sense for them, So give them it's called freedom. People like it. And a lot of that flexibility is really important if you're dealing with changes outside of your world, like, kids stuff and all this, right?
That's right.
So give them as much flexibility as you possibly can, but also give them transparency so they understand the impact. It's like, if this meeting is really important, then I'm going to be judged on it. Tell me I'm going to be judged on it, and I will show up. Show me, be as transparent as possible on how you make decisions about me that affect my career. And there was really good research in the pandemic that showed that when people were forced to go remote, employees that had really good managers that set clear goals, did regular check-ins, regular feedback, people's engagement went up. Employees that had lousy managers that didn't really set clear goals, weren't good at managing, weren't giving feedback, their engagement went way down. And so I think when we look at this, what can companies do to help people deal with all this change? It's make sure you've got really good managers and communication of transparency and goals and feedback. Really stress on giving people as much flexibility as you possibly can. And, and then listen to them.
Yeah.
And ask them, how's it going?
Yeah. That brings me back, or brings us back even to the golden rule. I mean, have the emotional intelligence and as much as you possibly can, treat others as they want to be treated, not necessarily as you want to be treated. That's super powerful. And I'm glad that's where we can, like, listen, we talk about burnout and the consequences of burnout and where we're going to end up as people that burnout makes me nervous. But this is, I think, well, it makes sense that companies are going to have to figure out a way to do exactly that you're talking about, or they'll lose employees, get burned out employees that then convert to apathetic employees.
Yeah. I think there's a larger issue too that I think as a society we have to focus on, because a lot of this, I'll use the example of like layoffs. There is a empathetic way to do layoffs. And I've seen companies do it this way where they're like, one, they're very transparent about it. They're like, hey, world's changed. And like, I remember one company that were like, they had to go to a factory and they had to tell the employees, they said, look, the world's changed. Yeah, you guys are doing a great job. But the reality is that people are consuming this product less and less and less and less and less. And there's no way we can be running this. We're going to have to revamp the factory. We're not going to have the same jobs. But they were very long-term, transparent, focused about that. They didn't hide it. I think in the past, companies were like, we have to hide it from employees so they don't quit. It's more like, no, be upfront. And if they feel they should quit, give them the power to make the decisions, going back that authentic transparency, right?
Yeah. Be honest.
What I found is, employees, when they understood that, it's like, okay, thank you. I was about to buy a house, but now I won't buy a house. These things have big effects on their lives, right? So transparent. And then of course, in the actual like layoffs, companies that provide like a year of healthcare, because they're like, hey, we know that you can't control healthcare costs. And so, there's a lot of things companies can do with layoffs that give people more of that sense of psychological safety and physical safety and restructuring. But still, companies are going to have to do this because the economy is changing all this. The larger question is, how do we need to change our society to a world where people are getting laid off all the time and are having to reskill and are having to change? And we still live in a society where the idea is still like, we're going to get educated till we're 25, and then we're going to work in the same basic industry for 40 years. Then we're going to retire, then we're going to die. Now we're not in a society like that anymore, but we're not wired for people making whole-scale career changes when they're in their 40s and have kids and all this other stuff, and they can't afford to go to school full-time, and they've got no health care and all these. I mean, we're the only society, the United States here is the only developed society where people make decisions based off on whether their kids get dental care. I mean, it's just I know. And on this, I don't want to get political per se. But it's funny because somebody asked me, well, companies shouldn't be in politics. I'm like, hey, companies have been lobbying for lower taxes as long as I've been around. That's pretty darn political.
They're in politics.
I think companies really, because when you look, sustainable economies require sustainable workforces. And we're running into these issues where we're going to have our workforce as a whole is going to be burned out and exhausted.
Yeah.
Companies really engaging more with the communities they're in to say, how can we make education and healthcare far more accessible and affordable to people when they're not working for us, because we want them to work for us, but we're not gonna be able to get them. Like childcare is a good example. Somebody was like, companies should provide childcare. And it's like, that's not going to help the single mother who can't look for a job because she doesn't have childcare.
Right.
No. It's, instead we really focusing on getting out and engaging the community. And I'm reminded of something that a CHRO said when we had the social justice, riots and things.
That's right.
A few years ago. And people were talking about, well, why are we getting involved in this? And she said, this is the community. Our employees live in our community. Our future talent lives in the community. The community is us. And really trying to break down that dichotomy, because I think when I look at these issues, there's so many things companies can and are doing that, help manage these burnout employee experiences internally, and share some of them in this book. Talent Tectonics gets into great detail, lots of examples and things like that. But the larger thing is companies' ability to be successful depends on the larger community that they're a part of, and that larger community, particularly the talent in that community. And I would hope, sort of in closing, that companies really lean more in and saying, we're not doing this just out of altruism, that, education should be affordable and all that. We're doing this because we want to operate in a labor market where we're surrounded by healthy, well-educated people. Mm-hmm. Because those are the people we're going to need when we grow. And if we don't have them, we're not going to be able to grow as a company. No.
I mean, you may not be able to survive as a company in that sort of a situation. No, I appreciate that a lot. The being honest, like you treat people as adults, not as children. You don't need to hide anything. Just be upfront and be honest about it. And really what you've mentioned about this, let machines be machines and do that kind of work, and let humans be human. Because everything you're talking about, we know community is important. We know that honesty is important. We know that this interaction beyond, hey, be a machine. Even if you're a knowledge worker, there's some managers, some companies are like, be a machine, productivity, take care of this. But as soon as it sort of morphs into something that's more meaningful and creates that kind of meaning, then they'll stick around.
Well, and that's what would sort of end on one other myth. One of the myths I talk about in the book, one is that we fear change. Another one is that we don't want to work. One of the big myths about people is that people don't want to work. We are wired to work. We are wired to want to accomplish achievements that make us a sense of, I achieved something.
Yeah.
That's why the word, we want our lives to have meaning, and meaning comes from doing things that other people rely on us for, whether it's usually living things, whether it's plants and the planet or people or pets. Yeah. My wife is a family medicine doctor, and she talks about when people retire, it's actually viewed as a health risk, because she said it's important to have a reason to get up in the morning. And work, when it's good, is that reason. It's not I have to work. It's I get to go to work to do something to provide to people. And I think this is a real fundamental shift in our society, that people are like, oh, we want to automate these tasks so that people can just stop working. And it's like, people don't want to stop working. It's unhealthy not to work. Working doesn't necessarily mean being paid. I think it has to economically, but it's like, we are wired to want to accomplish meaningful tasks. It's why the word meaningless is a synonym for depression.
Yeah.
And that, I would say, as you look at this technology, we should be using technology to automate away all of the stuff that's repetitive, where people come in and say, I just got to do this. But we should be focusing on saying, okay, how can we shift their time to give them something that gives people a sense of meaning, because it's tapping into their unique values as individuals. This is the utopian world that we could move to. But if we don't shift our thinking as a society from sort of like a 19th century view of why people work and the purpose of education and all that, where we could run into a real dystopian world. And I'd say, we don't want to go through another workers' revolution like we did in the 20th century. That didn't end well for a lot of people.
For a lot of people, that's right.
But we don't have to, if we acknowledge and lean into these issues. And they're not, it's not all doom and gloom. So we can create a fantastic world. I'm an optimist. But if we don't get ahead of it, we could create a really crappy one too.
Yeah. Well, you've converted me the same way. Like, I'm optimistic that there won't be pitchforks and fires and lobbing, what is it, like Molotov cocktails around. Yeah.
International Workers of the World Unite.
That's right on. Well, Steve, thank you so much. I mean, it's been a pleasure. Everything I expected, and just learning about these things, learning about people, and I know that our listeners will feel the same way. Is there any place that we can sort of learn more about you? We could follow your antics online and
the best place. Well, LinkedIn, definitely follow me on LinkedIn, Stephen T. Hunt. Pretty easy to find. Also, the book Talent Tectonics, there's a website, talenttectonics.com, or it's available on Amazon and all those sites. And I have a website out there, stephenthunt.com, that I try to keep up. But yeah, I think probably LinkedIn. And I'm always posting stuff on LinkedIn. That's the main area I share kind of my insights. So.
Well, super rad. Hey, thanks again.
Thank you.